Indisputable fact number 2, Jesus actually, physically, literally existed in the flesh. Most scholars are going to agree with this, including secular scholars. Allow me to read some quotes from 4 popular scholars, all of which are non-believers, and let's see what they have to say about the existence of Jesus. Bart Ehrman wrote, "He certainly existed, as virtually every competent scholar of antiquity, Christian or non-Christian, agrees." He said that in 2011. He also said, "Serious historians of the early Christian movement, all of them have spent many years preparing to be experts in their field. Just to read the ancient sources requires expertise in a range of ancient languages, Greek, Hebrew, Latin, and often Aramaic, Syriac, and Coptic, not to mention the modern languages of scholarship, for example, German and French. And that is just for starters. Expertise requires years of patiently examining ancient texts and a thorough grounding in the history and cultures of Greek and Roman antiquity, the religions of the ancient Mediterranean world, both pagan and Jewish, knowledge of the history of the Christian church and the development of its social life and theology, and well, lots of other things. It is striking that virtually everyone who has spent all the years needed to attain these qualifications is convinced that Jesus of Nazareth was a real historical figure." Atheist Michael Grant, he says this, "In recent years, no serious scholar has ventured to postulate the non-historicity of Jesus, or at any rate very few, and they have not succeeded in disposing of the much stronger, indeed very abundant evidence to the contrary. There are those who argue that Jesus is a figment of the church's imagination, that there was never a Jesus at all. I have to say that I do not know any responsible critical scholar who says that anymore." This man is an atheist. A former fundamentalist apologist by the name of Robert M. Price, he says this, "The existence of Jesus cannot be ruled out, but it is less probable than non-existence. Agrees that his perspective runs against the views of a majority of scholars." Maurice Casey, an irreligious professor of New Testament language and literature at the University of Nottingham, he concludes in his book, Jesus, Evidence in Argument or Mythicist Myths. He says this, "The whole idea that Jesus of Nazareth did not exist as a historical figure is verifiably false. Moreover, it has not been produced by anyone or anything with any reasonable relationship to critical scholarship. It belongs to the fantasy lives of the people who used to be fundamentalist Christians. They did not believe in the critical scholarship then, and they do not do so now. I cannot find any evidence that any of them have adequate professional qualifications." Now compare that to the number of scholars of any stripe that believe in Mithra or Dionysus, if that's how you say his name, Horus or Adonis, right? See how many scholars actually believe they physically or even spiritually existed. They rightly identify them as myths. And when you look into these so-called similarities that they say that you will find, you're going to see that they're superficial similarities. Many of them are later additions, meaning when those stories were first written, these so-called similarities were never a part of the story. They came later. What else came later was, or I should say also what came later was the story itself. Many of these stories came after the New Testament was written. So it's more likely that they would have borrowed from the biblical text about Jesus, not the other way around. Not to mention, we have more than enough ancient extra biblical sources such as Josephus and Tacitus, who both lived in the 1st century, which is, of course, the century that Jesus lived in. Ultimately, we have the biblical witness to the life of Jesus and eyewitness testimony in the Gospels. 1 John chapter 1, verses 1 through 3 says, "That which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our eyes, which we looked upon and have touched with our hands concerning the word of life. The life was made manifest, and we have seen it and testified to it and proclaimed to you the eternal life, which was with the Father and was made manifest to us. That which we have seen and heard we proclaim also to you, so that you too may have fellowship with us. And indeed, our fellowship is with the Father and with his Son, Jesus Christ."